are bringing facts back into fashion. We are making simple sanity sexy again. And we are beating crazies of all stripes back into the corners and margins and shadows where they belong. And always remember, we're not crazy. You are. Absolutely. All right. Welcome to the new frontier. The landscape has changed. Our universe has changed for sure. The name of the show is Radically Rational. My name is Paul Alexander. I'm joining you from Mustang Island on the Texas Gulf Coast. My buddy, my friend, my podcasting partner, Lori Pearson, is outside her very fashionable apartment in Austin, Texas. So we are properly socially distanced, this time by about 200 miles. So that's probably pretty good, right? How are you?
I'm doing great. You know, that's my standard answer. I'm telling myself that as well. You know, thank goodness here the weather is fine, so it makes it a little easier to try and stay positive and try and stay ahead of things. How are you?
I'm very well, actually. And you and I had a brief conversation earlier today. It's a beautiful day in Texas, and we're really trying to emphasize that because we all literally and figuratively need a little ray of sunshine right now, for sure. Now, Lori, how long have you and I known each other, roughly?
Golly, a long time.
Long time of work. And you know, we're buds and everything. So over the years, we have bought each other drinks. And I want to thank you for the drinks that you have purchased. But I think that our audience needs to know this about you, about the refinement of your tastes, etc. I will tell you this. When it comes to oral disinfectant, Lori Pearson insists on top shelf Clorox. She will not drink the cheap rot gut stuff. Am I right?
Clean on the rocks. Sometimes a twist. But I like, top shelf bleach.
Nothing else will do.
My go-to.
You know, you and I both sometimes have mixed emotions, I guess, about being Texans. I love this state. I know you do too, but we got things that bother us a little bit. Like, for example, in Texas, we still have vestiges of the old Sunday blue laws, you know, that are tied to a certain religion, et cetera. And it's really unfortunate right now because even now under Texas law, you cannot purchase Clorox for oral consumption before noon on Sunday.
That's crazy.
And I think there is a constitutional issue there, and I may take it to court sometime.
I think you should. Something else you should take to court, which I heard there were mumblings, it may just be Austin, one of the drinkingest cities in the country, literally, that they're thinking of keeping the to-go availability of bleach moving forward, that, you know, patrons can come up, buy their food, buy some drinks and some little to-go grown-up sippy cups and go on their merry way. And the argument is that if you take your bleach home and drink it, you're less likely to drive while drinking bleach than sitting in a venue or in a restaurant and drinking 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 bleaches and then trying to drive.
That's radically rational.
So
what is your limit, and what do you think the legal limit ought to be?
The legal limit for takeout or just the legal limit?
Shots of Clorox.
Listen, you know I'm good for one. I'm the lightest lightweight. And I'm just, it's my body does not like it. Does not like. I wish I could keep up with people, but I just can't. I'm the bummer. I'm the designated driver. Because by the time everybody else is ready to leave, I'm sober again.
Yeah, but you know what? There's certain people who shall remain nameless who think that Clorox can do a body good. So don't discount that top shelf medical advice. So this is our newest edition of Radically Rational, disinfecting surfaces. And when I talk about surfaces, I'm talking about countertops, not necessarily your spleen, for example. It's a really important thing right now, and it's one of the few weapons we have at our disposal along with social distancing. But here's the deal. The good news is that COVID-19 is really no match for standard, regular, run-of-the-mill household bleach. But the thing is, you got to hit all of those cooties, and sometimes we don't do that properly, and I am learning an awful lot about this. Also, of all the things that we've got going on right now, we are preparing for a rather major election in November. We're going to talk about how the current crisis could impact that. And this period's been such a blow to the spirit. And here's the thing, it's not the most important thing, but it does matter. And I'm talking about the absence of sports right now in our society, because it's such a big part of our national fabric and glue and what holds us together. And right now, we don't have it at a time where emotionally we probably need it. So we're going to get into that with one of my absolute favorite sportscasters in America. All right, so Lori, I'll just start with this. As Texas gets ready to kind of loosen its regulations and open up a little bit, I will tell you that I live in Port Aransas, Texas, which has a population of less than 6,000 people, but it's a very popular tourist spot. And the anxiety level here, Lori, is really, really rising. You can feel it. They kind of opened the beaches last weekend. We were overrun by people in San Antonio. San Antonio, of course, a COVID hotspot. And some of the quotes from the tourists were really alarming. It was along the lines of, oh, I was just getting cabin fever. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I had to come to Port Aransas. Now think about what that statement means. I had to go spread death in somebody else's community before I go. I just cannot tell you how selfish I find that.
I know.
What's it like in Austin?
It's kind of divided. You know, they're lifting the mandate for face masks. You know, because you would get questioned and stopped if you didn't have one if you were running your essential errands. I've seen, again, 50-50. It's since today and tomorrow, or when it's all lifting. People are still being cautious when they go to grocery stores or when they go to CVS, obviously, which is just a breeding ground of disgusting stuff. But when like right now, I can see people out on the street taking walks and they do not have masks. I've been on the trail today, and it went from about 70 to 80% of people wearing masks on the trail to about 5% today. And in general, I think, moms are starting to reach out to other moms, now that the standards are relaxing. Can we consider some kind of safe social distance reconvening of the children, or in my case, teens? But then I have a friend of mine who runs it's called Pack Mail, which is, I don't think you guys have Pack Mail, basically UPS and FedEx store and shipping hotspot, which is essential business. And they've said, we are dreading when they reopen, because number one, the roads are going to be crazy because people haven't driven in 2 months, and like if their cars start, she's like, we're dreading it. It's going to be insanity. So there's a lot of mixed feelings and mixed emotions for business who have been open, and then for the people who haven't even been out. So it's going to be a cluster. It's going to be crazy, I think.
Well, there is some rampant insanity, at least in my opinion. Social distancing works. It's been working. So let's do the rational thing and stop doing it. Makes my head hurt. Of course, Texas opening up on May 1st. We hope it does not turn out to be May Day. The term that's being used for these openings, particularly for restaurants, malls, theaters, is limited capacity. I might maintain that that's short for limited mental capacity and intellectual capacity. I'll tell you why. As you know, Lori, being a friend of mine for a long time, I have quadrimensophobia. It is fear of the fourth month, fear of April, and this, of course, has been the scariest April ever. And
it hasn't let you down this year, has it?
No, I would say it came at a quantum level this time. And just these horrible stats that we have to run through. We've lost more than 60,000 Americans. More than 1 million of us are infected with the virus. There is no vaccine yet. A couple of trials look pretty promising right here. The economic impact is just horrible, horrendous, untold horror here. Our economy is contracting at the annualized rate of 4.7%, which is just catastrophic. Household spending is down 7.6%. New unemployment figures, 3.8 million new unemployment claims this week alone. 30 million Americans have lost their jobs since mid-March. Now, we've got maybe something that's a little bit promising here in the form of a new drug. Can anybody give me the proper pronunciation on that? Because I don't want to mangle it, but it's something that does seem to have some proven benefit to some limited degree. It's the one that Dr. Fauci was talking about yesterday. This is not a vaccine. It's not a cure, but perhaps it could be a viable treatment. And the FDA is going to fast track this. They are going to authorize the use. And Lori, you and I were talking earlier, Dr. Fauci used the term proof of concept. And that actually kind of resonated with me because it means it may be a promising road to go down because it shows that there is a drug out there, and by extension, there could be other drugs out there that can at least slow the virus replication and thus decrease viral load, which may be the key to the lock somewhere down the road, although not in this form. This drug is beneficial. It is not a blockbuster. It is not a game changer.
No, and from what I've heard, the people who are responding best to it are the ones who are not in the advanced stages or in even the dying stages or respirator stages of their stint with COVID. It's people who are just starting to get sick or just get into the hospital, and that kind of mid-range, which is very important. And you told me the numbers earlier. What were the numbers or the percentage of people that responded? Do you have that?
Well, I do. In particular, it shortened hospital stays from 15 days to 11, which is about a 33% decrease. There's no direct tie to mortality right now, but by logical extension, if people in the hospital a shorter period of time, they're at less risk. It means they're recovering quicker. They're not as subject to secondary infections. So you would think that it would have some kind of impact on the mortality rate. I heard one doctor saying today that it probably means we can save one patient out of 30 that we couldn't otherwise. And he said, actually, when you look at this in medical statistical terms, that's pretty darn good. So it's interesting. This particular drug was developed as an Ebola drug back during the Ebola crisis, and it really was not particularly effective, but they hung on to it. One of the things they did find is there are very few side effects. So if nothing else, this could point us in the right direction in finding other drugs or combination of drugs or therapies that may be able to treat, if not cure, this disease. It's interesting to know that this is an intravenous drug, so you can't just take pills on a prophylactic basis here. So we got two. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Oh, no. And it's one of the bonuses is that if it is decreasing hospital stays, you're freeing up hospital beds sooner than you would have if you hadn't taken it. So,
which is good at every link in the chain, no question about it. So for right now, and this will change because we will have a vaccine, we will have treatments, but for right now, we've got two things going for us: social distancing, and the other thing is disinfecting. And again, I want to make sure that you know that means your table and not necessarily your esophagus. So I want to bring on our first guest. Her business is putting microorganisms out of business. So joining us from Wichita, Kansas is Ann Dupuy, who is the founder and owner of Elevated Health Systems. Again, that's headquartered in Wichita, Kansas. So you got this idea, you got obsessed with killing cooties. When and how is this applicable with what's going on right now?
Yes, I became aware of the crisis really regarding MRSA, both hospital acquired and community acquired. And this was now quite a while back. This was in 2008. And one way I got introduced to this was finding out that ultraviolet C light deactivates all microbes given sufficient direct exposure and time period.
And again, it does not belong in your chest cavity.
No.
Oh, okay, just want to make that clear. Okay.
No orifices, nowhere. And that just resonated with me, and I was curious. It was one of those things like, why do I not know about this? Why haven't I heard more? My background isn't as a laboratory worker, technician, and I discovered soon after following this trail of thought that, well, yes, it's used always in laboratories to sterilize this workstations, and it's just been well known for many decades that UVC light works.
Well, so, you're really at the cutting edge on this from a technological standpoint, but there are more traditional means, and the good news is that household bleach works on this virus, But here's the thing, you've educated me on this. There are a lot of things we're missing. There are a lot of holes in this net. And like so many other things, this requires real elbow grease to do it effectively.
Absolutely. And so in my investigation, that is exactly what I found, and has been found by anyone looking at it closely. And that is the disinfection, chemical and manual disinfection that's going on in hospitals and probably practiced by us in our own homes, unless we're really thinking about it, is insufficient to protect us from the worst of things. So, and if you look at it closer, even following manufacturers' directions on all the products we're most used to using around our home, we see that we're really not using them as directed.
Well, I'm guilty for sure. And this is ignorance on my part because I try to follow all the protocols and then you find out you made a mistake. I'm really pretty good at spraying things down with bleach water, but I spray it and walk away from it. And that's not how this game works, right?
No, it's ideally, optimally, it's not. And so, you know, it's been a little time even reviewing what does the EPA have to recommend for all of us. And really there's a step prior to disinfection. So not only are we not leaving the disinfectant on a sufficient time, which is really up to 10 minutes on the disinfectant and the microbe you're trying to kill, that is really step 2. And there's supposed to be a pre-step on this. And this is, they just call it cleaning with soap and water. And so ideally the disinfectant doesn't happen until the surface, whether it's a table or doorknob, light switch, commonly touched things, should be attended to vigorously with some detergent or soap and water. Then following that step, and that first step should use some sort of little brush because you really want to get that surface kind of perturbed. And then the next step is applying the disinfectant and leaving it on for that time. So
I'm feeling pretty inadequate as a result, but I'm going to get better. And I do appreciate this tutorial for sure. So we're trying to make our homes as safe as they can be. There's no such thing as 100% safe. You know, we're reopening businesses. We're reopening the economy. Real quickly, what are the most important things that business owners can do to make their environment at least safer, not only for their customers, but for their employees as well?
And I think attending to just the basics of infection control always boils down to 3 steps. They can be as simple as, you know, or very, very complicated, and that is isolation. Isolation can mean anything that you believe is contaminated, you know, an item. It could be shoes, you know, a purse, what have you. You have to figure out a way to isolate what's already believed to be contaminated. And I can talk more about different ways. And in certain industries, I'm thinking, of course, about shoes coming into a business. If this is a business that really has a demand, as now everyone does, to minimize, they could draw on what's used in other industries of putting on hygienic booties.
Oh, wow.
So you've probably seen that, you know, people coming into your home as service people, they pop on their hygienic booties and come on in. So depending on the business, you know, that is one thing people would have available to them.
But that really could be the new normal. So let me ask you this pretty blunt question, both from a scientific basis and from a cultural basis. You know, I would love to think of myself as a fitness freak. I enjoy exercising. I enjoy working out. Historically, I've enjoyed being a member of a gym. I'm just telling you straight up, never again under any circumstances. So is that now a cultural, and we don't have a whole lot of time to discuss it, is that a cultural thing of the past? And then real quickly, a reference to, what does this do to high school, in particular, athletic and PE locker rooms going forward?
You know, it's a grim picture, and hopefully technologies can intervene in some levels. I think you're totally right that, you know, coming into a crowded area like that is not going to be most people's preference. They'll avoid it. Was just speaking to someone yesterday regarding this, and he is in touch with some decision makers in the gym industry, and they're trying to reimagine it. And, you know, I'm believing that UVC light has a place in that. But obviously there are going to be other things. There's going to be more tele exercise. I'm hearing some of these industries are just going to be zooming into people's home and having 20 people on a screen, so it's still interactive.
Where is Jack LaLanne when you need it? He died way too soon. Am I right?
We'll have to be innovative, and there'll be different models, and it'll be dispersed, and nothing will be the same.
Lori, I'm done with gyms. How about you?
With gyms, not the restaurant, the actual place to work out. No, and since everybody's been working out at home, hopefully to some degree or another, you've realized how efficiently you can get your workout in at home. And so I'm not going. No, it's always grossed me out. Those sweaty guys that never wipe the equipment, always getting up off the bench and they leave that wet mark. I mean, how often would you have to come in with this light that Anne's talking about to disinfect a gym in order to keep it clean enough for the next person to not worry about? I mean, I think it's impossible.
About every 3 minutes for sure. And even actually before the COVID crisis, I decided for health reasons and for microbial reasons that I was pretty well done with that. So we got people fighting the good fight. Ann Dupuy, you are leading the parade. Ann Dupuy, who is the president of Elevated Health Systems, located in Wichita, Kansas, and truly one of the nation's preeminent authorities on this issue of disinfecting. And thank you so much, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right, so we have other things going on, and a couple of things. We're going to talk with Dave Barnett here in just a few minutes. Dave Barnett, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. That's just my guy. All right, man, that's my idol when it comes to a sportscaster. You look up sportscaster, and there is Dave Barnett's picture. He is a pro's pro, so I'm looking forward to that. But we've got other things going on, like, I don't know, a general election in November. Let's bring in our next guest, Dr. David Smith from Sam Houston State University, professor of political science. David, where I'm coming from and Lori's coming from, this really isn't a partisan discussion, and I'm not so much talking about the outcome of the election, just the logistical execution of it. And we're facing some unprecedented challenges here. What are some of the things we have to work out between now and that first Tuesday in November?
A lot of it's going to depend on, do they have, number one, the resources at the state level. So when we think about going to the polls, to the voting booths, we take that long piece of paper, we take that computerized tablet, and we enter in our selections. If we switch to a mail-in ballot system, does the state or does the county have those readers? And some of those, and I was just reading an article to refresh my mind, between $500,000 and $1 million per unit, depending on the number of ballots or the types of ballots you're going to read. And so do we have the resources in terms of the money to convert? And number two, how fast can we get those ballots printed? And a lot of it's going to depend on the size of the population. How forward thinking is the state or the counties? In particular, and second, how well educated can we get the actual voter when it comes to casting a mail-in ballot? For the most part, we're used to going to the polls or to the booths, and we're not used to filling out a mail-in ballot. That's an anomaly to us.
Right.
We don't want this to be. Go ahead, Lloyd, please.
I was going to say, we can't get people to fill out the census and that's a simple one name, one box, prepaid. So yeah, I think you're right. And then you're dealing with counting them.
Well, and that's really where, so you've got that one-time unit cost, $500,000 to $1 million.
Yeah.
What the states are saying, the National Council of State Legislatures, is the biggest concern they have is how much money it's going to cost in each state to educate the voters. Because you're right, the census is the biggest hassle right now, because people don't know if they should fill it out online, if they should fill out the mailed out form, or should they just wait for someone to knock on their door? Well, that part's not going to happen.
Right.
So I mean, if you look at North Texas right now, I think it's at 23% of the population up here has filled out their census form. So how do we encourage people to engage and participate, especially when it comes to affecting, the amount of money we'll get as a state or a county, and the amount of legislators or federal offices we'll have to select out in 2022. So that's the biggest snag that the state legislatures are seeing.
I bet.
Our guest is Dr. David Smith, political science professor from Sam Houston State University. And again, we're really not coming from a position of political partisanship here. We're just examining the situation and the logistics of what has to be done. But claims have been made that mail-in ballots are particularly susceptible to voter fraud. Is there any hard data to back up that claim?
It's anecdotal at best, but there's no true hard and fast numbers when it comes to is there any more or less voter fraud when it comes to mail-in ballots. And we look at some of the states that have the open provision for mail-in ballots. Hawaii, California, Arizona has a provision in there. And a lot of it's just the sheer hassle. And if you incorrectly fill out the ballot, it's tossed. And there could be arguments made that could be potentially be voter fraud because they incorrectly filled it out. Again, that's a lack of knowledge on both the voters' part and potentially who's reviewing those mail-in ballots. And so until you can find definitive proof, I think it's unfair or unjust to say there's a rampant voter fraud. And there's also on the other side, we could argue from the perspective of, well, with you cast your physical ballot, well, we found votes in lakes and streams and everywhere else in the past. So I think 6 of one, half dozen the other. I'm not going to say it's 100% foolproof or fraud proof, but I think it's going to be minimal at best. And a lot of it's going to be, did someone receive a ballot and then decide to show up to a poll later on? And then how do you fix that problem?
I saw a report earlier today, which was sort of fascinating, and just out before I even say it, I know it's going to cost a lot of money because everything does. But it's something similar to you fill out the ballot and you maybe put your phone number in or your email address or one or both. And then when your personal ballot has been received and counted, it's almost like a UPS tracking number. You get pinged back. Your vote was counted in this county, by this person with their whatever, and it's kind of a checks and balance system, which I realize, again, the technology to develop that and the people to man it and sort through the numbers is not cheap, and that's a whole extra step for somebody else to enter, and it's just another entry point into the system, which I realize we're always trying to protect from. But it sounded like a decent idea. I would want to know, did they get my ballot? Was it accounted for, or is it just in this blur of election day readings?
Well, and I think one way, instead of putting in your number there, each ballot has its own little ID code. And so what you could do is you, like FedEx and UPS, and whenever you're doing your Amazon tracking, get updates as to where your package is. So you put it in and then you put in your number, and then as soon as it's scanned, there you go. And that way you save that back end work and you just do it as an individual.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I think the technology for that piece is already there. How quickly, again, that's my speculation as someone who has been shopping frequently from Amazon. I'm tracking everything just because I want to know when it's dropped off. So that aspect of it is there. Could we use that technology to do mail-in ballots? That would be the big question.
Yeah.
Is there, in fact, any mechanism whereby the general election in November could be postponed?
No. And I say that, so 95% sure. And I mean, I almost want to be 100% sure, but if you were 100% sure, you better be spot on. Without complete natural disaster and breakdown of the system, there's no way to stop the election. And part of it is, it's the basis of our democracy, the institutions, and the amount of trust, however minimal or maximum it may be. We know that every 4 years in November, there's an election. And if that were to change, that could undermine and potentially feed into some of those myths and misgivings that people have who are not supporters of the president and saying, well, he's just trying to stay in as a dictator. And
right.
that would be a huge issue. So I don't think there's any way to stop it. And again, I think mail-in ballots will become the new norm in terms of for this election, especially when we see the reports coming out of Wisconsin, who held the election on schedule. And now I think the numbers I saw this morning were 60 people, 59 people have contracted or have been tested positive for COVID-19, both voters and the people working in the booths. So I think that's an issue. And the more social distancing, I mean, Ann spoke about it earlier, social distancing, make sure you're being clean about it. And how do you keep those devices clean, especially with the sheer number of people who are expected to participate? But I don't think you'll stop it, but I think you'll see a change in how people are voting.
Given the fact, as a practical matter, that the Dems now have a presidential nominee in Joe Biden, and of course, President Trump, the incumbent on the Republican side, what are the conventions going to look like? What do they have to get done? And will there be any sense to be made about doing that in person? The last I heard, and correct me, you may have more recent information, is Republicans were still considering having an actual physical convention.
Wow.
What do you think this is going to ultimately play out with? Are they going to, or are they not? And what are the problems or impediments there? And what do they need to accomplish?
Well, I think for the Democrats and how they're going to do their convention, I think they're leaning towards a virtual convention. There may be some, physical presence in a location, but for the most part, they're taking it from the idea that we have to social distance. We have to keep not only our candidates safe, but the voters themselves, as well as the delegates. And so I think social distancing will be tantamount or paramount for them. And for the Republican side, and I think this is an interesting question because just this morning, President Trump tweeted out that he is going to be leaving this week for Arizona to hold a rally or to hold an event. So I think that really answers the question, will the Republicans hold a national convention in person? And I think given the president's predilection to be an in-person, on-stage kind of individual, kind of president, I think the Republican Party is leaning towards an in-person convention. How many people will be able to attend? That's another question. And I think a lot of it's going to depend what we see data-wise coming out of these states reopening and people becoming more and more comfortable grouping together again, as opposed to the last 6 weeks. But my expectation is you will have the Democrats leading a virtual convention or a minimal convention, and the Republicans leaning towards an in-person, but the size to be determined.
Dr. Smith, I wouldn't put you on the spot. I'm not going to ask you to handicap the presidential race, but I am going to ask you to place a bet on the over-under of how many lawsuits and counter lawsuits we have following this general election in November.
It's tough. I mean, if we're not suing businesses, and that's some of the legislation being discussed now, you could be looking at a couple of thousand that could be marshaled into a class action event. You could be looking at a couple of hundred. We saw, I think it was yesterday, Andrew Yang is suing the state of New York. Texas is being sued for voting rights. So depending on which part we're looking at, anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand. It just depends on the way the wind blows for the day.
Wow.
We are living in interesting times. Sometimes, Lori, I wish these times were a little less interesting. But for a professor of political science and Dr. David Smith from Sam Houston State, thank you so much. These are indeed interesting times. What's your take on this whole thing about how this crisis right now might impact the execution of the election, Lori?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Still talking to me. How much the price of what is going to affect the elections?
Yeah, I just, what would be your concerns about pulling off the election in an efficient way and in a way that's consistent with democracy, making sure people are represented? What major concerns do you have if you do it all?
Uniformity. People are used to going out and voting. As much as they complained about what a pain and how inefficient and how untrustworthy the whole process was, I think trying to shift to mail-in ballots is just going to confound the general populace, and I think unfortunately it's going to fall through the cracks, and the people that need to vote probably won't. And that's scary that the Republicans are holding in-person rallies basically, and the Democrats are doing virtual. I think that's the messaging there is just whether the moving forward and the staying in. It's just all that division is continuing. I just think it's too much. Like I said, you either go and you vote, or you're sick or out of the country and you can't. Like those were your two options. To have all these options of, ballots and mail-in and in-person, and I think that's going to be the problem. My long answer is uniformity.
That's going to be tough to pull off. There are going to be a lot of impediments here and a lot of questions and a lot of lingering issues. And one of those lingering issues is that all of the scientific models, and yes, I still believe in science, are that unfortunately, one way or the other, we are going to have a strong COVID-19 resurgence in the fall, and that could be an immediate factor in the election as well. So again, Dr. David Smith, one of our really good friends of the program, really interesting guy. We thank you so much. And good luck to everybody at Sam Houston State. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you may rank it down in priority, and yes, it's not as important as life and the economy, but there are some cultural things about this crisis that really do affect us, and I don't think should minimize it. Sports is such a huge part of the fabric of this nation. And I might argue that as we are becoming polarized as never before in this country, it may be the only thing that holds people together. You'll see people in stadiums who probably would not like each other in real life, in personal life. They would be political opponents. They would be philosophical opponents, but they're high-fiving each other because they're wearing the same jersey. Well, that's going away temporarily, and it's left a void. I want to welcome to the program Dave Barnett, full disclosure, a longtime friend. And I'm just going to say this, and it's not meant to embarrass you at all. If somebody has never watched you work, they need to, because that is absolutely something to see. And when I say watch you work, not just the product on television and radio, but actually physically watching you work. David, it's obviously such a labor of love for you. This is something you wanted since you were a little kid. So it's not really at all accurate to say that sports doesn't matter. It's such an emotional thing. From a cultural standpoint, Dave, what's your biggest concern about how this void and this vacuum is affecting our society, and maybe especially our kids?
Well, I think you summarized it pretty well, because it's something that people who don't agree on anything else can't agree on. A friend of mine who I think is pretty certifiable politically, but we agree on teams. And that's carried out times millions and millions and millions every day. So I think society has gotten used to having sports and television and movies and everything else, that we can live without, but we don't want to live without, because that kind of redefines quality of life. But we're having to. It's now coming up on almost going to be 2 months here in a few days since the last sporting event happened, and there's no end in sight. And teams and leagues are making contingency plans, and baseball is gaming out, okay, what if we played in 3 different stadiums and divided up temporarily into 3 different leagues and had no fans? So, they're thinking about things like that on paper. And then when they think a little harder about things, okay, well, so who do you let in this stadium if not fans? Well, there's still going to be some people working in the locker room, some people working in the press box. Those people have to basically live in a biodome. You can't let them go in and out. Who's going to bring in the food? If someone sneezes on the food and that makes its way into the locker room, well, you've just potentially infected the entire biodome, and you got to start from scratch.
And let's face it, Dave, for sure, this too, full confession time. Let's admit this. Anybody who ever got into sports journalism or sportscasting, you were only there for the free food anyway. So if people start sneezing, this is a problem.
It's over.
Well, the food hasn't necessarily been free since Moses Malone was signed by the Philadelphia 76ers. In the early 80s, the 76ers started charging the media for their media food to help pay Moses Malone's salary. So That's how far back I go. But yeah, the freebies and the perks and the great seats, and absolutely, that's a big part of it.
Our guest, and we're so glad he's here, is national sportscaster Dave Barnett, who is a true triple threat at both the college and professional level. His baseball work, his football work, his basketball work, just superb, absolutely top. For all I know, you may do other sports. Have there been some other kind of more exotic sports or experiences in your career that, man, I can't even believe I had a chance to do that?
They let me do some soccer. I think they regret that now at FS1 because the first soccer game I ever saw that my kids didn't play in was a Big 12 championship on FS1 a few years ago. So that probably wasn't the greatest assignment I've ever gotten. Fake my way through that. I did a few golf tournaments at ESPN, a pre-Olympic track meet. Actually, in 1996 was my very first event at ESPN. But yeah, the big three are definitely the ones that I'm safe. I don't have to fake my way through football, basketball, or baseball.
That's for sure. There is no faking the funk on that when it comes to Dave Barnett. I've always regarded sports, not only as a kid, but now as an adult. Dave, it's my blankie. It's my binky. And now at a time when culturally we may need blankie and binky like never before, it's not there and it's hard to deal with. And again, we're in no way saying that this is on the same plateau as loss of life, loss of jobs, economic disaster, etc. But it's not accurate to say that it doesn't matter either, because it does.
Yeah, and the hardest part is we have no idea where this is really heading. All these scenarios that leagues and conferences are planning out can be thrown out in an hour, and then they start from scratch. And so I think as more time goes on, I've kind of had to wrap my brain around the fact that I may well not do another event in 2020, and it may be well into 2021. I know the colleges are thinking, how would we play football if it doesn't start until January or February? How would that go with all the other spring sports, winter sports going on? And, you know, that's how they're thinking today. And how they thought last week is probably already been thrown out. So that's what's hard about this. The only comparison I think anybody can really draw in our business is 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, sports shut down for about a week and a half. And we knew it was coming back up, and it was just a matter of logistics and how do you reschedule the games that were lost? How do you get people to the events? The only way it affected me was I was doing the only sporting event that week that did not shut down across the country. It was a golf tournament in Pennsylvania, the U.S. Senior Women's Amateur on ESPN. And they decided to go ahead and play it because all the competitors had made it there. They already had a practice round. Not good optics, but they went ahead and played. And then it was a matter of getting everyone who worked on that show for ESPN either home or wherever the next assignment was going to be. And the next assignment was the following weekend when football picked back up. So nothing like that. I mean, you know, that scenario is already over a month past applying here. So that's the hardest thing is there's no comparison. I guess maybe World War II, you know, some things didn't play. There were some bowl games and golf tournaments canceled, but again, that's such a completely different scenario that I'm trying to think best case and worst case. And best case is, hey, drinking Clorox works, and we can all start up tomorrow if we survive. Right. The more realistic case is it may well take 12 to 18 months to get a vaccination. And I think that's going to be what it takes for fans to come back. I don't think fans are going to, you know, just because they miss football, return in droves to stadiums and be elbow to elbow with people that may or may not be infected, unless there is some proven cure, vaccine, or what have you. If that miraculously shows up in the next few months, fantastic. Maybe we don't miss that much football. But I can't see the colleges asking football players, especially if classes aren't in session, to show up anyway and bang on each other and be sweaty and shower and locker together and just hope everything goes well. You know, I can't see very many players signing on to that.
Yeah.
So that pushes it, you know, months into the future. And then, you know, we're not even talking about the effect that has on budgets. And big time programs are already cutting back and asking some of their better paid employees to do without 10, 20% of their salaries. That's just the beginning of this. You know, a typical mid-major or lower level college football program survives because they can play one big road game a year.
Right.
You know, somebody visits Texas A&M, that's a gigantic check that floats the entire athletic department for a year. How do they manage without that? That's what's keeping athletic directors up at night right now.
Wow.
Our guest is longtime veteran national sportscaster Dave Barnett. And, you know, we could say that sports are the toy department, but I think it's important to remember that this whole process of shutting down America, this started on a Wednesday night with the NBA. It was the NBA that saw the danger here and responded to it quickly before any other business, any other industry.
You know, it's probably, for however long he plays, what Rudy Gobert is going to be best remembered for.
Unfortunately,
that press conference where he went up and touched everything and every microphone and then tested positive, and then it turns out he had infected Donovan Mitchell. And I remember exactly where I was because I was about to call some games in the Conference USA basketball tournament at the Star in Frisco. And they played the first round games, and my first game was going to be the next day. And that Rudy Gobert thing happened, and before the first round games were completed, the conferences had already announced they would continue, but with no fans the next day. So the quarterfinal round was going to play at the Star, but no fans. So that was, I think, a Tuesday night.
Mm-hmm.
The next morning, teams are going to shoot around, and the word came down that the tournament had been canceled, but not the NCAA tournament. So the regular season champion for this event was awarded the overall championship, which was North Texas. So they weren't going to have to win the tournament. They were going to get the bid because the NCAA tournament was still on. By that afternoon, the NCAA tournament had been canceled. So this is well less than 24 hours. We've gone from business as usual to no fans to no conference tournaments to no March Madness whatsoever. That's how fast things broke. And Rudy Gobert was the guy that pushed the button that got it all started.
Dave, let's hope it doesn't get to this, although if it's the only way to salvage it, maybe it's worth discussing. But how would you, as a broadcaster, feel about calling a game from a TV truck off a monitor?
You know, I was already that day, I was trying to think, how will I call this game with no fans? Exactly how much will I have to dial down my volume? Because at my usual volume, every player and every coach will be able to hear every word I say, and that's not good for anybody. So, you know, I was thinking, well, I don't want it to make it all the way down to a golf whisper, but, you know, where is the middle ground going to be here? If it's from a studio or from a truck, a lot of that has already been going on as networks are trying to cut back on costs. They've decided they can save money by not sending announcers to events, which to me is insanity, considering how little money it saves and what they're giving up in terms of being able to be there, actually, you know, see everything that you can see when you're there in person, as opposed to only what cameras are capturing for you. It would be doable. It's already, you know, shown to be doable, but I think that eventually the audience would become aware. And I think then you're just hoping that the audience is just happy that it's on, you know, that, hey, here's a live event and we don't really care any of the details. That may become the new norm. You know, every day we come upon things in our lives that we would never have imagined a month ago or 2 months ago. And now we're already sort of having to get used to it. That may be a cost-cutting measure that becomes the new norm, you know, whenever we do pick business back up again.
Yeah, I think that really is what causes a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. We are going to get through this episode one way or the other, but the idea that it will ever be the same is naive. So we're going to have to get used to some new things going forward. And Dave Barnett, among many other things, a music aficionado. So when it comes to the sports situation right now, I'm reminded of Joni Mitchell. Sometimes you just don't know what you got till it's gone.
Very good. Yeah, very good. By the way, speaking of music, Lori Pearson reminds me of Stevie Nicks with just different hair color. Has that ever struck you, Paul?
Yeah, except that Lori's got a much better voice. Lori's got a much better voice.
Well,
It's not even close.
They both do very well with their voices, yeah. But that was the first vibe that hit me. Wow, that's Stevie Nicks with a little darker hair.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Maybe it's the glasses today.
Maybe.
We're all trying to look through rose-colored glasses right now. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Hey, it was just so good to see you again. Looking forward to subsequent conversations. All the best to you and your family. And thank you for all the enjoyment you have brought to so many sports fans, certainly myself included. Thank you very much.
I can't thank you enough for the kind comments. And it's great, even in this virtual setting here, to be back in touch with you.
Our pleasure. Dave Barnett. Again, if you want to see a pro fly the airplane, as we sometimes say in sports broadcast, sit in the cockpit with Dave Barnett one time, because that's the way you do that. So we've been talking about how the COVID virus pandemic is affecting sports in general. But after all, it's baseball season. We're entering the month of May. You know, Americans think about baseball this time of year, and we are really fortunate to have with us a gentleman who has been a very successful scout in Major League Baseball for a very long time with the California, Anaheim, Los Angeles, Orange County, somewhere in Southern California Angels. I'm talking about my buddy, Rudy Vasquez. So we're going to do a little MLB with Rudy V. So Rudy, what are you hearing? I mean, are we going to have a baseball season? And if so, what form is it going to take? What's it going to look like?
Well, here's what we can start out with, Paul. First of all, thanks for having me on. Here's where we can start. The one thing for certain is there's a lot of uncertainty. That is for sure. I've talked to agents today. I've talked to players today. Obviously, did a little research, and there's a lot of hope, a lot of conversation. I think they're getting closer to a decision. But if I had to say, I'm going to say from what I've learned that there's going to be a season. It's going to be a short season, anywhere from 80 to 125, 135 games. And how that's going to play out is still to be determined. Are they going to play in Arizona, Texas, and Florida? Are they going to play at respective cities regionally without a lot of travel? I think one thing, a commonality, a common thread was that there's going to be no fans, that they're going to play to empty stadiums, be it again in Arizona, Texas, and Florida, or at the respective teams' home fields.
Rudy, the logistics here just make my head hurt, because baseball is an everyday sport. And I think we could all agree, you get one case in one clubhouse, and this whole plan looks really bad, and it's probably not sustainable. So is this true or false? To make this work, you'd have to test everybody involved every single day, and even that might not be foolproof.
Well, again, the people I spoke to didn't allude to that extent, but that's very close to what is probably going to be the reality. Again, a lot of balls in the air, a lot of things being discussed. Players want to play. Obviously, owners want to have games. Fans want to watch on TV. But as you've said throughout this show today, you got to follow the science, and you've got to be smart. You can't let emotion overrun fact. And the fact is, no one has a concrete answer right now.
Rudy, we've talked about how starting and stopping the economy might leave us high-centered and not going anywhere. What about stopping and starting baseball? For example, you know, we were pretty deep in spring training when baseball pulled the plug here. How harmful might it be to players? How difficult might it be to just pick spring training up right now And in your expert estimation, and you would know, how long would they have to conduct this spring training going forward to be safely ready to play?
Well, and I talked to a couple guys about that. They would love to mimic what a real spring training would be, but these are unprecedented times. If I had to throw a dart at a dartboard, I bet the players are going to want a minimum of 3 weeks to, so to speak, get back and get the cobwebs off. And believe me, they're not sitting around right now at their respective homes, wherever they are. These guys are still getting after it. They're trying to stay as game ready as possible. You can't replicate real team practice. You certainly can't replicate game action against the best players in the world. But these guys aren't sitting around, just watching Netflix. They're staying as ready as they can. So when the bell rings, they're ready to get after it. By that, I mean, get after whatever a spring training is going to be and then get ready to play.
Any idea what an adjusted playoff format might look like?
Again, I'm not real sure. The guy I spoke to today was, 3 divisions geographically, a few teams in each, play each other, advance to a top tier, and then ultimately with 2 teams. But boy, Paul, there's just nothing concrete right now that I've been able to find. There's no definitive, this is the way it's going to be, this is what the playoffs are going to look like, and this is the way it's going to happen.
Rudy, of course, we referenced your stellar career as a Major League Baseball scout. Okay, let's think about players coming up. The fact that there is no youth baseball right now, there's no high school baseball right now. What does that do to this matriculation process, and how might those players be damaged long term? And what do you do if you're a scout right now?
What you do if you're a scout right now, you listen to your club, and basically each club took their scouts off the road, so to speak, about a month ago or a few weeks ago for sure. And they were told they cannot speak to players. They can't speak to coaches. They can just watch video and film that they have access to. They could have conference calls among each other, again, the scouts and personnel. But they're slowly now being able to get back and talk to coaches. I don't think they're still as of today, able to reach out and talk to a player. So as a scout, you're at the mercy of what your club is saying. As a club, you're at the mercy of what Rob Manfred and MLB is saying. So right now, there's not a lot of interaction at all between scouts and prospective players who are looking to be drafted. And so they're basically at a standstill at home doing a lot of video work. They can't go out. Even if a player said, hey, I'm going to call 10 scouts myself, excuse me, because I'm going to throw a bullpen with my dad, and I'm going to let them all know it's at 2 o'clock at so-and-so place. The scouts can't show up. You're not allowed to show up.
Rudy, I know that you're about as emotionally invested in that sport and your profession as anybody could be, that it is a true labor of love. From a personal and emotional standpoint, a spring without baseball, how much is that hurting you?
I mean, I'm 63 years young, and as far back as I can remember, it was like Roger Hornsby once said when they asked him, what do you do in the off season? He said, I look out the window and wait for spring baseball to start. I do the same thing. I can't wait every year. It's something that I've done and look forward to, playing baseball and watching baseball and reading baseball since as far back as I can remember. So it has been a very unusual and strange spring, and we hope spring's eternal. And we're just, as fans and players and everybody who loves the game and plays the game, just waiting for something concrete to come out to say that we can get back to playing this beautiful game, America's pastime.
Rudy, I realize this is speculation, but just generalize if you can. How would most major league players feel about playing baseball in front of nobody?
Well, one of the things any great athlete tells you, right, is one of the hardest things to retire, when you retire, is the roar of the crowd. And that is a big, you get pumped up, you get excited, you're a performer, right? I mean, you perform. You love to play the game, but part of the game at the professional level, a huge part, is you're performing in front of a lot of people. And I think that affects them. It's going to be something they're just going to have to accept. There's not going to be any less effort. You're still going to see Mike Trout be Mike Trout, and you're going to see the best players be the best players. But I think they're going to miss that, double in the gap, sliding into second base and not hearing anybody but their teammates cheering for them.
Well, the one thing we know for sure is that of everything in America, one thing you're certainly not going to be able to kill is baseball, because it is part of our heart and soul and fabric and part of who we are. And let's hope that baseball players can get back to being baseball players, and scouts can go back to being scouts and doing what they love. And we can hear that crack of the bat again very, very soon.
No, absolutely. I mean, millions of people across America, simple fans, the entertainment factor. I mean, the players, believe me, the players, they want to get back out there and play. They're dying to play. They want to play. Owners want games. Everybody wants games. And again, when the announcement comes down, I think it's going to come down pretty quickly of exactly what we're going to see, regardless of whether it's 80, 100, 135 games. People are going to be happy to get back on the field and start playing baseball again.
Yeah.
Rudy, let's get that going immediately. Again, thank you so much. Your passion for the game shines through and shows through, and we share your wish that we start playing America's pastime again very, very soon. And thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So the name of this program is Radically Rational. And the whole idea is we don't really like this post-fact world, and we want to bring facts back into fashion. So every week on Radically Rational, we feature another logical fallacy. And this week, it is the false analogy. And let me tell you where I'm coming from. I've got precious little patience for this at this point. If you were one of the people back in January who was in any way analogizing this COVID outbreak to the flu, I'm going to cut you a little slack, I guess, because it is, after all, a novel coronavirus. And we didn't know anything. Now, frankly, if you were following the science, it was a ridiculous analogy to begin with. But now, as we enter the month of May, if you're still using that analogy, not only is it irrational, it's really kind of offensive, Lori, because these two things are not comparable. And if you call it the flu, I think you are in many ways disrespecting victims and their families and medical professionals and really anybody with an ounce of humanity, and for that matter, an ounce of a brain. This is not the flu. The flu does not kill young, healthy people in these numbers, and the flu does not annually wipe out our frontline healthcare professionals. So I'm going to ask everybody to stop using the false analogy of likening this to the flu, because it really is a disgusting notion at this point.
In the words of former NBA great Bill Russell, get that weak stuff out of here.
Yes. And the numbers on the flu are always annual numbers. And the numbers we have on COVID are 90 days old. There's no comparison anyway, but you know what? Let's check in with those people and next January and do a comparison. And that'll shut them down real quick, because there will be no comparison to the numbers that we're going to see after this whole COVID thing has been around for a year, based against the flu numbers, and like you said, we don't shut down the economy for the flu. And I realize that is everybody's argument, which is kind of backwards. We don't shut the economy down for the flu. Right. There's your point. Exactly.
Exactly. Thank you very much for proving our point. Exactly. Yes. Why? Because this is not the flu.
Exactly.
And a lot of these folks who make this false analogy, they act like these COVID numbers are in place of annual flu casualties. No, it's on top of it. Okay. The flu is still in business. The flu is still open for business, as are all other physical maladies, etc. This is on top of that. And clearly this is unprecedented. Clearly this is more contagious than the flu. Clearly the mortality rate is much greater than that of the flu. So I would just like to ask people politely, at least for now, to stop using what is at this point a foolish and even stupid analogy. And if you do that, you're a sheep stretch. Okay, the sheep stretch is one of our friends here on Radically Rational. It's a cross between a sheep and an ostrich. And actually, Lori, as you know, it was a genetic mutation that was a result of nuclear testing accidents on Bikini Atoll. Okay, and we ended up with half a sheep and half an ostrich. So the sheep will follow you anywhere, and then the ostrich has to bury its head somewhere, and guess where that is? A sheep stretch.
Yep. And they're overpopulating the earth, or they're at least overpopulating Facebook anyway. I don't know. I can't vouch for anything else, but Yeah, they're everywhere. They're very prolific.
All right, so one of the things we try to do is ask the question, where do we go from here? And that's really been the theme of today's episode. And I'm not sure, and nobody's sure. And Lori, here's the problem. I think most human beings are wired this way. Even when you're going through really challenging adversity, maybe something that's pushed you something that you've never gone before, as long as you know that it's got a finish line, as long as you know it's got an expiration date, as long as you know come this day, if I'm still here, it's all good. You can deal with it. It's the uncertainty here that is making us all more than a little bit punchy.
And usually the deadlines that we pass, or the end dates or the finish lines or whatever they're looking like, bring you back to some kind of normalcy, right? And with these, sorry, I've got a grackle that wants to chime in.
I'll see your grackle and raise you a raven
I love you.
in my driveway.
Yeah, with this stuff, you're not facing relief. You're not looking at relief. When, all of these, we're lifting the mandates on masks. We're allowing people, we're opening movie theaters. That doesn't give relief. That brings more tension. Well, how do we manage that? What do we do about it? Is it safe? Is it not safe? These people say yes. These people say no. What I'm saying is, even the few little landmarks and the little nuggets of possibility of something turning around finally that are being thrown at us are still not relief makers, because there's more questions than answers. You know what I'm saying?
I do indeed. And I think at a time like this, the least that we can ask for and install really is consistency of message and the scale of mixed messages that are being thrown out here. And I don't have to go through the litany of every single one of them, but you have an administration issuing guidelines, then violating their own guidelines, and encouraging people and even praising people for violating their own guidelines. And we wonder why there's confusion. And my concern, Lori, would be that we're trying this hybrid approach that's going to fail on two fronts. Obviously, we've got untold economic suffering. We're all aware of that. But ask yourself this question, because being rational sometimes means being very linear. What's the problem here? The problem is the COVID-19 virus. Prior to that time, our economy was humming. All the fundamentals, all the indicators were strong. You don't have to overcomplicate this. If the problem is the virus, then the thing that we have to address is the virus. And I think by trying to be neither a fish nor fowl and having it both ways, we could lose on both fronts, both the public health front and the economic front, because pure economists, people who care about the economy, that's their job. That's their concern. They're not health science professionals. They're saying, if we get into an endless cycle where it's start and stop, we are never going to get out of this rut. And in fact, it will do much more damage to our economy long term.
Right, and sports is a perfect example, as is live music. You want these events to go on for the soul and the sanctity of our country and the people who just really derive so much joy and hope from those things. And at the very best, we're looking at all this protocol and all this red tape just to get a basically dead event happening in an empty stadium so that people can watch from home. And it's, but think of the roar of the crowd and the applause and the people painting their chests and all that craziness and the hats and the outlandishness and all that joy, even from your couch, you're tapping in and you're mainlining that. I mean, that's life. And so the best we're going to be able to do is have an empty stadium with an event going on. That's what we're hoping for. I mean, there's a real setback in, going towards, the economy, like you were mentioning the economy, where, the quarters are going to pass and they're going to look grimmer and grimmer. And I hate to be so negative about it, but it's just the reality is it's not that, okay, the first quarter and the second quarter, is over. And the problem is it's not an amputation, or it is an amputation, and then there's the bleed out. It doesn't stop. It's not gonna get better even when we can get back to work, because the fallout of all of this is going to continue for so long afterwards. Like you both were saying, for at least a year and a half. So how do we come to grips with that? How do we manage that? How do we stay positive? How do we keep on hoping and keep our heads up and keep our kids going? Because they're looking to us. The kids are looking to us. Is it going to be okay? I'm going to look at mom. Is she going to be okay? You know, you gotta keep pushing forward.
But in any environment, what you're looking for is consistency and consistency of message.
Right. To make
And
it.
you don't want to hear contradictions here that don't make any sense to you. And you know, to use a sports term here, we clearly lack a defensive coordinator. There is no coordination of this effort. And Lori, it's very concerning because you have people, they would deny it, but they want to assign to this virus human characteristics. They want to anthropomorphize it. They want to think that this virus thinks like a human being, and in some cases is politically partisan. Like the existence of this virus is offensive to me politically, which is the definition of being irrational. So all I would ask is that we have a strategy, that we realize that the virus does not affect borders. When we talk about someplace being okay right now, wouldn't the idea be to keep that place okay? Because the one thing you know for sure, everything else in this equation, Lori, is uncertain. But the one thing you know for sure is that right now, until these cases start to die down and the number of deaths and hospitalizations start to decrease, the one thing you know is to whatever degree you reopen the economy right now, you are throwing kindling on this fire from a purely viral and medical standpoint. And there are going to be more cases, and there are going to be more deaths. And the human horror of that aside, even if your primary concern here is economic, that does not work economically as well.
Right. To start and stop. No, it's not going to work. And the people who are following the recommendations of local and state and even national government, carefully doing what they are told to do, will start emerging when these deadlines come and go. And they'll be intermingling with the people who never gave a single rat's patootie about any of the precautions, any of the PPE guidelines. So those people, I hate saying that, but those people have been out touching things for a really long time and with very little regard, like in Port Aransas, to the people who actually live there and are doing things safely. So when you take those, the two worlds are going to clash every time there's another opening of a theater. And there's going to be an increase in cases. It's as simple as exposure. And this virus is very contagious. So, and has all kinds of interesting characteristics that we're still learning about that we don't like. None of them are good. This is like the perfectly, perfectly developed virus to sustain itself, to live on surfaces, to be contagious, to suspend itself in air longer than other viruses. I mean, it's like it's a super virus or something. It's crazy. So,
well, the only thing I know for sure is that wishful thinking is not a strategy. And if you actually deconstruct this and analyze it, wishful thinking seems to be the basis and the nucleus of our national strategy for dealing with this medical science crisis here. And I'm really not exaggerating. When the president, for the second time, now says that the problem will just disappear, it will just go away, it means that the core of your policy is wishful thinking. And if you engage in wishful thinking, what you're essentially doing is lying. And you know what we call people who lie on this program. We call them liars. Okay, and again, this is apolitical. It is politically nonpartisan. We're not tied to any party. But if somebody ties a policy to wishful thinking, you are essentially lying to me. And that should be offensive to everybody who's getting lied here. And I think just real quickly, don't want to belabor the point, but the whole Clorox thing, the whole disinfectant thing with the president, I think the media is kind of missing the mark on this, because all I've heard is, oh my God, it was such horrible advice. Just think of all the Americans who then wanted to ingest disinfectant. Well, look, there was a smattering of that, but that's not really the point. The point is not that he led them to that action. We as Americans are generally smarter than that. The point is that in the midst of a scientific crisis, that the leader of this program was so scientifically illiterate that he suggested to his medical team that this might be an appropriate avenue for research. And the one thing, because the name of the show is Radically Rational, please don't tell me that was sarcastic. Please don't tell me that was taken out of context. And please don't tell me that it was an answer to an insolent question by a reporter. It was not an answer to a question. There was no question asked. He clearly was asking this as a clinical question to Dr. Birx, and there was no sarcasm there. There just wasn't. And I want to say this too, and this is not necessarily about bashing individuals. And partisanship is when you tie a position to a political party. But think about this. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. You have the head of the president's task force, Vice President Mike Pence. He issues these guidelines and then conspicuously violates the guidelines. And in particular, having the vice president walk into the Mayo Clinic with no mask. First of all, let's talk about mixed messages. Secondly, it truly is a reckless act with respect to the health of doctors there and patients there, et cetera. But also just think about the total lack of respect for the people who are running that hospital. And then Mike Pence says he didn't want to wear a mask because he wanted to be able to, quote, look the doctors in the eye. Well, excuse me. If you're wearing that mask over your eyes, first of all, you are wearing that mask improperly.
Yes. I know I had a hard time with that too. And there's really no good excuse. Even if you don't think masks do any good, which is so unscientific and ridiculous, you should still respect, as you said, the doctors, the patients, the protocol already in place. It's just cavalier and disrespectful is what it is.
Well, and then the justification he used was, I get tested every day. Well, once again,
nice.
that just shows that shows a colossal misunderstanding of the science.
Yes.
You know, unless you've been tested in the last 30 seconds, if you're in that environment, it means absolutely nothing. And you are assuming a risk for yourself and others that you're asking other people not to assume. And again, the contradictions here, it's no wonder that the American public is so whipsawed and whiplashed on this, because we're not getting any consistency. And you brought up just a great analogy earlier today. You know, when we talk about this idea of ingesting or finding a way to inject disinfectants. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of a 4-year-old wondering that if he swallows a watermelon seed, if it's going to grow a watermelon in his tummy.
It's a total 4-year-old question. And again, you can muse all you want about, wouldn't it be cool if we could, I don't know, drink bleach and kill the virus? Yuck, 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 yuck. But not at a press conference. Not when there's very sensitive data being passed around right now. You know, keep your wonderings to yourself. But you're not a 4-year-old strapped into a child safety seat with a sippy cup. You are the president, and you need to not muse about those kinds of things without giving it thought. Yeah, it is very much like that. Watermelon seed, if I swallow bubble gum, will I blow a bubble out my butt? I mean, these are real questions that kids ask. And it's cute.
What's the answer to that last one, by the way?
I'll get back to you on that. I'll do an extensive study later.
We get some wonderful feedback from a lot of our viewers and listeners,
Yes.
people who have bought into the concept of radically rational. And this was pointed out to me by a viewer today. If we want to debate whether our response was slow and inadequate as a nation, consider this. The State of the Union address was February 4th. February 4th. Okay, we already knew what was going on. We already knew what was coming on February 4th. And in the State of the Union address that lasted 78 minutes, the president referenced what is now arguably the greatest crisis in the history of our country. He referenced it in 3 brief sentences. That would be the definition of a day late and many dollars short.
Yeah, it's the worst, to me, the worst strategy. It's a really bad parenting strategy when you're trying to distract a child from something that big. Like when you take your kid to the doctor and they have to get a shot, and you're like, look over here, wait. It's when you've got a 2-year-old who needs to get a needle stuck in its thigh, that's one thing. But when you're talking to a country full of people who understands basic science and know that there's a real problem when by ignoring that and not addressing it more specifically on a regular basis, I might add, forget just the State of the Union, but it should foster mistrust. It should be insulting. It should be like, why aren't you addressing what I know to be true? It's almost like a really abusive relationship, you know, when somebody discounts you. It's gaslighting, is what it is. You know?
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's a distraction that makes you want to question your own sanity when you're absolutely sane. You're just in an insane environment. Here's the one thing I know for sure, and it's a shame that in many cases, this is going to happen not because of our leadership, but despite it. But listen, here's the deal, and this is not just a happy rah-rah pep rally. We're going to beat this because we're Americans, and American genius is going to come to the fore. You're already seeing that happen.
Yeah.
And I would just encourage everybody to remember who we are and what we've done.
What we've gotten through.
What we've gotten through for more than 250 years. And if there's one thing you can always depend on, it's American genius. And we don't know what the final path is to a solution, but you are starting to see a couple of little trails that make a lot of sense scientifically. Some of these vaccine trials appear very promising. There are some therapies involved, some drugs involved that may be able to intercept the virus, keep it from replicating. And you've got a lot of smart people working on this 24/7 as never before, because ultimately this is about protecting our home. And as we get pretty close to wrapping up this edition of Radically Rational, Lori, I want to tell you this story. This is just so moving to my wife, Jo, and to me. Everybody in our neighborhood is properly practicing social distancing. They're really being good about that. We're looking out for each other. But we have an angel anonymous artist in the neighborhood who is taking small rocks, and he or she, because we don't know who this artist is painting a portrait of the houses of the neighbors on one side, and it says "Home Sweet Home" on the other side. And then the anonymous, wonderful angel artist then places that rock on your porch for you to find the next morning, almost like an Easter egg.
Homeward bound, I wish I was homeward bound. Home, where my thoughts escaping, home, where my music's playing, home, where my love lies waiting silently for me.
And it is an untold source of unity here, and it reminds us that we really are all into this together. So again, I have no doubt that we are going to prevail here, and the way that this has been fast-tracked, it may happen a little sooner than was even realistic, even a few days ago. But we've all got ambitions, Lori. While we've got this weird time in our lives, do you have any particular ambition right now? Like maybe something you want to master that you've never done before, or maybe some kind of party trick that once there are parties again. Is there anything you want to do that you're practicing on right now?
Party trick, not including that bubblegum thing we talked about earlier. A friend of mine showed me something. I don't have the coins with me, so I can't demonstrate, where you line 3/4 up right here, bounce it in the air, you bounce the coins in the air, and you catch them all, or one at a time, before they hit the ground. I've been challenged to learn how to do that. Now, that is a mindless, brainless, useless activity, but I think that's something to distract myself from checking news feeds. What about you?
Yeah, here's what I'm going to do, and I don't know if you can see my T-shirt or not. I'll just kind of hold it up here so you can see Chicago and Terry Cat. So this is what I'm going to do, and Dave will know where I'm coming from. I haven't mastered it yet, but by the next edition of Radically Rational, I am going to be able to scat sing every little note, every little internal note, every little grace note, every little wah-wah of Terry's solo in the middle of 25 or 64. Every single one. I'm not going to miss one. I got it about 2/3 down. And Lori, I've only been working on this since 1970.
surprised you can't do that in your sleep, Paul. I mean, seriously, if there's ever been a bigger fan of Chicago, I don't know who it was. It surprises me that you can't already do that, but that's an impressive goal. I'm impressed.
Well, as the poet once said, a man's reach exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? So we'll keep working on that for sure. I want to thank all of our guests. You guys have been absolutely wonderful. So to Ann Dupuy, to Dr. David Smith, to Dave Barnett, and to my wonderful co-host, Lori Pearson. Thank you again for watching Radically Rational. We will see you again soon. We will prevail.